ordinary South Africans, civic organizations, NGOs. There were many people who sent emails. There were many people who sent messages, even when it was very difficult, and said to us, "We stand with you. Please continue with the work of the Commission." Those who supported us in that way enabled us to continue, even when it was very difficult. So I think that it's important that, excuse me, when we are 1 year after the handover of the final report and we look back, I just acknowledge the role that many people played in making sure that we could continue with our work. I therefore think that it is very important that we meet in this fashion a year since the handover of the last two parts of the report, because a year is a reasonable time to reflect on the work of the Commission. The topic that I've been asked to address, as I have indicated, is, has the capturing of the state placed our democracy at risk? The answer to the question is an unequivocal yes. However, it is necessary to start at the beginning. And the beginning is that when the Commission began its hearings, it invited two international experts on state capture to give evidence before it. Those were Professor Kaufman and Elman, and they gave a definition of state capture that included that the state captures make illicit payments to government officials in order to get them to change the rules of the game or rules and regulations to advantage them. Indeed, in their article, Seize the State, Seize the Day, they provide the following definition of state capture. State capture is defined as shaping the formation of the basic rules of the game, i.e. laws, rules, decrees, and regulations through illicit and non-transparent private payments to public officials. The Commission did not regard this definition as embracing all forms of state capture. In South Africa, those who pursued state capture in SOEs did not seek to have any rules, laws, or regulations changed. The state capture that was pursued by the Guptas and their associates was anchored on the influence and control they had on the head of state, who was also the president of the ruling party, and ensured that he would engineer the removal from strategic positions in SOEs of persons who would not be prepared to cooperate with the Guptas in wrongdoing. And he would appoint to those strategic positions people who would cooperate with the Guptas and with those who had influence on him. Notwithstanding the fact that state capture in South Africa, whether by the Guptas or Bosasa or Bain and Company, did not include that any rules or regulations be changed. The Commission found that state capture had happened in this country. The South African version of state capture entailed having great influence or control over government officials, which included the head of state and the use of payments to politicians and corrupt government officials to ensure that existing rules and regulations would be breached for the purpose of advancing their business interests. I do not think that the changing of rules and regulations is an essential requirement of state capture. I cannot see why, if A, instead of asking that the rules be changed, uses illicit payments with government officials in order to ensure that existing rules are breached, why that should not be state capture. It seems to me that there are different forms of state capture, but one must recognize the essential elements. The capture of the state does not require that all the three arms of state be captured. If an individual or group of individuals have as strong an influence on the head of state as did the Guptas, and that influence is used not for the head of state to make decisions that are lawful and serve the interests of the people, but that serve the interests of only some individuals or group of individuals or entities, that, in my view, is still state capture, notwithstanding the fact that not all three arms of the state are involved. It is important that we refresh our memories a little bit about how, in particular, the Guptas went about their project of state capture. There is no doubt, when one goes through the evidence that was heard by the Commission, that the Guptas and those who worked with them had planned this project in good time and worked on it for quite some time. You will remember that in 2009, we had a general election, and that after the election, President Zuma became the president of the country. But the Guptas had been close to the family for quite a few years before that. But where they started was with Transnet after the departure of Maria Ramos. The evidence that the Commission had might not be so strong to say that in regard to why President Zuma insisted on Mr. Gama being the CEO of Transnet, that it was the Guptas. But what happened afterwards suggests very strongly that it may have been. Now, that was 2009. So for about 2 years, President Zuma did not want the position to be filled. That is the position of CEO of Transnet, because he wanted Mr. Gama. And this was at a time when Mr. Gama had gone through a very fair disciplinary process chaired by a member of the Johannesburg Bar, an independent person who wrote a very thorough judgment and made findings against him. But nevertheless, Mr. Zuma wanted Mr. Gama to be the CEO of Transnet. For over 2 years, the vacancy was not filled. On the 7th of December 2010, the Gupta's newspaper came out for the first time, and it said Mr. Brian Molefe would be the CEO of Transnet. Within 3 or 4 months thereafter, he became Group CEO of Transnet, that is Mr. Brian Molefe. If you move from Transnet at that time and you go to Denel, you will find that they were already working at Denel in 2011. They met with Mr. Riaz Saluji, who was CEO of Denel, and tried to see if he could cooperate with them. But they were frustrated because he didn't cooperate with them. And it seems that they then left that project or shelved it, because also the board that was there was a board that was very professional and that had done a very good job. And it seems from all the evidence was made up of people of integrity. What they had done in the meantime is that in 2015, they then went to ESCOM. They've been to Transnet. Molefe was there, and in the board of Transnet, that certain people that they put in there, then they moved to ESCOM. And then this, in 2015, the month of March becomes very important in the Gupta state capture, because a lot of things happened during that month. But also the year of 2015 is quite important, because later in the year, other events happen which go to the issue of state capture. In March, you have a meeting involving, which was meant to include Mr. Zuma, Mr. Dumieni, and a gentleman called Mr. Linnell at Matlambandlovu, where they were going to discuss the removal of certain officials at ESCOM. That meeting did not ultimately have Mr. Zuma, but the other two continued. Then on the 8th of March, you have a meeting in Mr. Zuma's official residence in Durban, where the plan for the removal of certain executives at ESCOM is discussed. But that plan was not a plan that was done or made in that meeting. That plan had been made elsewhere, and the real people who were behind it were not in that meeting except for Mr. Zuma, who spent a certain amount of time there. And then on the 10th of March, you have a board meeting at ESCOM. Now, this board was a board which the Guptas had already made sure included a lot of people who had a relationship with them or their associates. And that board then discusses the removal or suspension of certain executives. Ultimately, they are suspended the following day on the 11th. But the 10th of March is also an important date when we look at how the Guptas went about their state capture project. Because at Melrose Arch on the 10th of March, Mr. Essa met with Mr. Koko from ESCOM. And the two of them invited certain officials of ESCOM and discussed with them the fact that there were going to be certain suspensions and discussed the issue of who would act in what positions. And that is the 10th of March. 11th of March, the suspensions happen. Within 3-4 months after that, they are removed completely. They are offered lots of money to go away. And in the meantime, Mr. Brian Molefe is seconded from Transnet to ESCOM. He whose assumption of the position of CEO of Transnet was foretold by the Gupta newspaper. And then Mr. Anuj Singh takes the position of Chief Financial Officer. And the rest of what happened after that we all know. But they then take exactly that plan they used at ESCOM and go to Denel. And at Denel, they make sure that Minister Brown, who the commission found had a relationship with the Guptas, which he denied, that she made sure that the people, most of the people who were appointed to the board of Denel had a relationship with the Guptas. And they took as chairperson an attorney who had been struck off the roll for a few years and was readmitted. But when you try and find out how he was readmitted, it becomes a very difficult thing, because the judgment that relates to his being struck off shows that this was somebody that didn't have integrity. And you would expect that the Minister of Public Enterprises, when they look for people who could be appointed as board members, would be people, they would be looking for people of integrity. And of course, there too, at Denel, certain officials were suspended, including the CEO and the financial officer. So they always made sure that the CEO must be their person and the chief financial officer must be their person. So they did that, and they put their people, and the rest of what happened is what we know. That was how they operated. So when the commission then looked at the definition that the international experts had provided, the commission took the view that what happened in South Africa, even though there was no demand or request for the rules to be changed, was state capture. It will be seen that whether one is dealing with the phenomenon of state capture as defined by Professors Hellman or Kaufman, or with the South African version of state capture places our democracy at risk. State capture is about greed, selfishness, and criminality. Where it has happened in South Africa, the head of state was captured, and he used his constitutional and legal powers to make decisions that advanced the business interests of the Guptas. During the years which were considered by the Commission, the evidence revealed a number of instances where the head of state at the time made decisions that benefited the Guptas. One will recall the case of Mr. Masego, Themba Masego. One will recall the case of the removal of certain executives at ESCOM. one will recall in a different context how, as the judgment of the Constitutional Court in Corruption Watch reveals, he did everything to push the National Director of Public Prosecutions at the time, Mr. Ngasana, out of that position in circumstances where there was no valid reason for it. Where a president no longer makes decisions that serve the interests of the people, but makes decisions that serve his own interests or his family or his friends, that undermines our democracy. What demonstrates beyond any doubt that state capture places our democracy at risk is when one deals with the role of the National Assembly. Section 42(3) of the Constitution provides that the National Assembly is elected to represent the people. So when the National Assembly fails to protect the people against state capture, it fails in this duty. When you represent someone in a forum, you are supposed to protect that person's interests. And if you fail to do that, you have failed in your duty. Apart from providing that the National Assembly is elected to represent the people and to ensure government by the people under the Constitution, Section 42(3) of the Constitution goes on to provide that the National Assembly does this, that is, to represent the people and to ensure government by the people under the Constitution by choosing the President, by providing a national forum for public consideration of issues taken democratically, and by making sure that it performs its oversight functions over the executive. The Commission, in its report, detailed various instances during the Gupta state capture where Parliament, the National Assembly, failed to take steps that would have made sure that the state capture was exposed early, and that would have made sure that it was stopped before South Africans lost over 58 billion rand through the Gupta state capture. The reason why it failed is well known. It is because the majority party refused to agree to the establishment of an inquiry to investigate the allegations. There were a number of instances where there was an opportunity for the majority party in Parliament to agree, but it did not. And therefore, the Guptas continued with their project. And the transactions that happened afterwards happened because they were not stopped by Parliament when it could have stopped them. I have said before that if another group of people were to do exactly what the Guptas did to pursue state capture, if another group were to do the same, Parliament would still not be able to stop it. That is simply because I've seen nothing that has changed. The question that arises then is, if Parliament won't be able to protect the interests of the people, if there are attempts for another state capture, who will protect the people? I can only think of two possible answers. The one is that if certain electoral reforms are made which allow people to have more power over members of parliament with constituencies, there may be a chance that there would be a number of members of parliament who know what the right thing is to do, who would be prepared to say no to their own parties when their parties want them to do something that is against the interests of the people. And they would be able to do so because they would know that even if the party expelled them, as long as the people in their constituency are happy with their performance in parliament, they would be able to go back to parliament after the next elections. Other than that, the other possibility is one that the Commission has pointed out in its report, namely, there should be a standing anti-state capture and anti-corruption commission that works the same way as the commission that I was honored to chair, which can call anybody, whether it's the president or any member of parliament or any minister, to come and answer questions where there are allegations of corruption and state capture. So that even if the majority in parliament do not want certain questions to be asked or protect ministers and the president from certain questions, in that commission there would be full opportunity for everything to be explored, and the evidence given and the answers given would be given in the open. So at least there would be nothing that could be swept under the carpet. And the hope is that if you have state capture and through that commission it is established that there is serious corruption and state capture, there would be a strong public opinion which might force even a majority in parliament that didn't want to do something to actually do something because of the strong public opinion. The last one is simply that we have to trust the citizens of this country. I believe in active citizenry. I believe that the people of South Africa are the ones who must take their destiny in their own hands. They are the ones who must say, we have had state capture, but it is not going to happen again. They must be the ones who say, never, never, and never again. They are the ones who must see which leaders are tolerant of corruption. Because South Africa right now doesn't need leaders who are tolerant of corruption. It needs leaders who are prepared to go very far to fight corruption. So my belief is that when everything else fails, it is you, the people, that give me hope. It is you, the people, that I believe will make sure that this country is turned around. Thank you.
Sure, CJ, you leave us with many, many challenges for the day ahead.